Welcome back, Game Freaks. Jamie, your Mythic Dungeon Master, back to talk more about role playing games. The title of today's video is a question. Are OSR Dungeon Masters egomaniacs? And are OSR players dumbasses? I'm not making an emphatic statement, I'm just posing the questions. And I'm going to back it up with some of the experience that I have in role playing games during my lifetime. Now, this could easily be changed to any system that you want. Our D&D Dungeon Masters, egomaniacs. Our Pathfinder Dungeon Masters, Game Masters, egomaniacs are all 5e players, dumbasses, so on, so forth. Okay, probably. But I'm going to focus on OSR because I've had good and bad experiences with them. So there are some things I want to talk about because they have this kind of a dogma and an attitude that kind of irks me at times. My original dungeon master, who ran AD&D for us initially, and then second edition, and then so on and so forth, moving into third and Pathfinder, and then 5e. Yes, there was a skip over 4e, though I played some version of it at least through computer games. He definitely has those OSR sensibilities, and this is just a thing that just kind of perplexed me. And I'm going through a bit of just a dark period right now. I'm a little bummed out because of just the events of the past year and what have you. And I recently I tried to join a game with a dungeon master that I really like, who I think has these OSR sensibilities. But they basically ignored my request and then ran the game I was wanting to play without ever saying anything to me about it. Like, we can't get you into this one, but maybe next time, so on and so forth. So, fuck it. I'm through asking. I'm going to come here and complain on my own video and point all this stuff out. The backstory. Um, well, I'll give you the entire thesis up front. In life, some people like to play checkers, and some people like to play chess. My uncle taught me how to play chess when I was very, very young. He was a guy who could do that crap and beat you in like 3 moves. I still don't understand that, but he could do it. I like the tactics and the challenge of chess, and that translates into role playing games, okay? Some people like checkers. They want to just jump. It's okay. If you like chess, it's cool. If you like checkers, that's cool. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to piss some of you off. That's cool. Feel free to add to the discussion if you want to jump in and attack me. I'm a master troll killer. It's not going to get you anywhere. I'm just going to ignore you. Okay? But add to the discussion. That's cool. I invite it. Now, the reason these OSR DMs and players irk me is because they want to tout, just the glories of Dungeons and Dragons retro clones, which are in effect either some kind of version of the old basic games, whether it's the Moldvay box, which is what I started with as a little kid, all the way back in 1980 or 81. I didn't timestamp it at the time. I'd be talking about this crap so many years later. But this is where I started with this little box. And even as a kid opening this up, I just thought, man, why? I want to do so much more. Why can't I be a halfling that's a cleric, or why can't I be a halfling fighter? Why can't I be this or that? You know, even as a kid, it was just not enough. I still have these. I love the art in these old books. Yeah, the images were so thought provoking. and they inspired so many stories for me that I love to hold on to these things. Now, these aren't my original copies. I had to find replacements over the years because my original copies, for the most part, they're usually just destroyed. They were so well worn and read through. So then I immediately got the Expert set, which was the next box set in that Mold Vase series, and it expanded out the options in a way that was complex enough that I thought, okay, well, this is it. I won't need anything more than this. This is pretty complicated. It goes up to, just looking at the tables, level 14 for fighters, 14 for magic users, 14 for thieves. Clerics could go up to 14. Dwarves could go up to 12. Elves, it lists at 10. So I thought, okay, well, this is great. I can play this and advance in the game. So even at the most basic level, basic wasn't enough for me. Okay. So I had tried unsuccessfully for years to join into D&D games, and there was really only one kid on my block. No one at school, I'm talking about like elementary years, pre-high school. No one at school played it. This was the height of the Satanic Panic, when these games were thought to be, you know, gateways for the devil to possess our soul, along with rock and roll. So that was just utterly bizarre. But there was one kid who lived down around the corner, and actually he didn't even live there. He stayed with his cousin for one summer. So for one summer, this kid was there. He was several years older, and he played AD&D, and they played, I guess, what was essentially just a homebrew game at the time. And he would tell me about their adventures. And one time I went over and I wanted to join them. His friends would come over and they would play, and they wouldn't let me play. If you've seen Steven Spielberg's E.T., that scene where they're all playing D&D in the kitchen, I was Elliot. I want to play. I want to play. I want to play. They're like, no response. Just ignored. Go away. Never got to play as a kid. I only played just the basic set. And that was because my mom, who bought it for me, ran Keep on the Borderlands for me. But after she did that, she was done with it. I mean, she had stuff to do, so I was lucky to get her to do that for me over the course of 2 or 3 sessions or whatever. So I had to develop a system of, I would create my characters, and then I would use the adventure, and I would move my character through the adventure, and then when they would enter a new room, I would just read what happened, and I would roll to see what happened with my character. I wouldn't read ahead, so that I could still make decisions without knowing what was coming. Okay, so I would kind of try to play through an adventure module, and the adventure module that came with the expert set was the Isle of Dread. So I basically solo ran the Isle of Dread for myself, and that was the extent of my role playing experience as a kid. I mean, I did play the D&D basic set. Okay, so years later, get into high school, meet my good friend Tony at the comic shop. He's on the phone talking to some weirdo in his group about their D&D game. I'm buying comics, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you talking about D&D? I like D&D too." And he's like, "Well, why don't you come and join us?" And that was when I got to start playing first edition. Again, these are not my original copies. The originals are just lost to time, shredded, lost in various moves. So when I replaced them, I made sure to get the cover art that I like, the Dave Tramper cover. Is that Dave Tramper as well? But anyway, so they invited me to play AD&D with them. So I go to the first session, and the DM Will is there, which I'm going to talk a bit about Will because he's my OSR DM. Definitely greatest DM I ever had. Everything about a lot of my sensibilities to the way that Will ran the game. But over time, I feel like Will limited himself. Now, Will, if you're watching this, God bless you. I love you. Thank you for everything. Number two, probably not watching this because you can't be bothered to watch my videos. Number three, I'm going to talk about all the shit that pissed me off. So sorry about that up front. So I'm watching this, and Will is he's all hunched over the first time I see him. And he's doing this voice. Well, what you must do is go to the. And this is how he's talking. This is the first time I see him as I'm walking in the door, and he's doing this role play scenario, and he's playing this old woman or old witch or something, and he was totally committed to it. To putting you into it, and he would do the voices, and he would, sometimes make little gestures or hold his body in a certain way. And they invited me to join, and it was a blast. Okay, so compared to the basic rules, this is the checkers version, and AD&D is the chess version. It was much more complicated. There are many books, many rules, many expansions. I had a blast with it. I had an absolute blast. My first character was horrible. It was a druid. There's always kind of a trial and error process of creating your first character. And I wanted to make this kind of an Al-Anon type figure, but I had that in my mind without realizing that my buddy Tony already had a literal Al-Anon druid in the campaign, so I couldn't make another Al-Anon. It had to be kind of a different druid, and the character kind of sucked. The build kind of sucked, and Will, the way he played, he wouldn't let you change anything. He had this kind of an old school sensibility. When you rolled a stat, that was your stat. If you rolled a 4, you had a 4. If you rolled an 18, you had an 18. So if you picked this class, you picked these spells, then you were stuck with it. If you didn't like the build you came up with, it was like, well, too bad. So my druid got killed by vampires. We started Ravenloft. He wound up getting on a cart with vampires and taken away and was never seen again. And then that was when I decided, well, I need to be a more powerful character. Okay, I just got totally destroyed. So that was when I decided I'm going to be a bard. And in first edition, bards were something else. Now, since Will was so strict about not letting you re-roll anything, I figured out early on what I had to do was, instead of trying to remake one character, was I would just make many until I found one that worked. And eventually I rolled a stat array that had like a 17 and one 18 and a 16. But the most important thing was it hit the percentage for psionics. It was like I rolled a 99 or a 00. So in old AD&D, all characters, if your DM allowed this, and this was a great thing about Will, was he would allow pretty much anything that was created into the game. I rolled psionics, and I thought, okay, well, this is an advantage I can use. And then I thought, okay, well, now I want to play a bard. And in AD&D first edition, bards were the shit. They had to multi-class, so they had to start as fighters, which meant they were tough, they could fight. Then they had to go through levels of rogue, which means they learned to be stealthy and they got backstab. And then they finally got into bard class. So you had gateways you had to go through just to be a bard. So you essentially had to gain like 10 levels in classes before you could choose bard and then start advancing in it. So eventually I had this psionic bard running around who was just totally badass character. It was unashamed power gaming. But that's what had to be done to survive. It was that kind of game. So, the great joy of role playing to me is creating a character and working with your dungeon master or game master to build their story over time. Make their story, write their epic story. I mean, all of those old D&D came from all those old stories. It's an amalgamation of concepts taken from Conan, from Tolkien, from Elric of Melniboné, all these things and all mushed together. And that's what's so great about it. I mean, they literally use dwarves, elves, and halflings. I mean, that's pure Tolkien. Pure Tolkien. You know, the game itself is based on Lord of the Rings, essentially, pretty much. I lost my train of thought there. Well, anyway. Oh, yes. So the joy to me is building that character and watching it grow and watching the story advance over time. Now, the problem is if you play in a group, you have to play with the group. And my group wanted to try different systems, and they tried everything. They tried everything. We played GURPS. We played Marvel superheroes. We played DC superheroes. We played a bunch of shit I can't even remember. Palladium Fantasy. I wanted to do like Star Frontiers and Gamma World, but we never quite got around to it. Star Wars role playing game from West End. You know, all these different systems. Another problem was they wanted to play different settings. Now, I've got a character I'm happy with. I want to play my super bard, my psionic crazy ass bard. I'm sure as a DM I would have banned myself. It was such a crazy character. They want to try different settings, so now TSR says, "Hey, here's Forgotten Realms." So now we have to play Forgotten Realms. We have to make all new characters. That can be fun if that's all you want to do is just make new characters. But if you're trying to build a character and tell their story, until you get to a satisfactory conclusion of some sort, you want to keep playing that character. And that's where I was. So I was annoyed to play all these different game systems. Now, mea culpa, I loved Marvel superheroes, but DC superheroes sucked. It was horrible. It was a horrible system. Although the Omni Tool gadget is a great idea. But Marvel trounced the shit out of it. GURPS was horrible to play. Palladium Fantasy, horrible to play. GURPS had great source books. I still have a shelf full of GURPS source books right here that I use for writing and role playing. I use for writing stories because they're such great source books. And also, I just never had control of, like, I feel like playing Star Wars this week, so everybody plays. No, it was the group who decided, and usually like one or two people. You know, so I just had to kind of go along with it. Now, what does this all have to do with OSR? Okay. The change in setting was annoying. Now, what I found out was even more annoying was when TSR decided to make a second edition of their game. Now, this shouldn't be like a huge problem because there had already been like the original D&D boxes, which predated the basic stuff I showed you here, which predated AD&D. But if you were a Bard player in first edition, you could not play the same type of Bard in second edition. That was one of the first things they did. And this is something that happens with every edition changes. There are what are now commonly known as nerfs, which I hate kind of smarky terminology like that, but they purposely change the way character classes are built and designed to play. So if you have a love for a certain character and that type of play, and you see an addition come along that changes it completely, nerfs it, you're going to have problems with addition changes, and that's me. Another big problem with the edition change was they refocused the entire game from the Greyhawk setting to pretty much Forgotten Realms. It was like, okay, well now Forgotten Realms is the system that you should play. And they purposely sabotaged everything Greyhawk, which was the original mix and match setting of Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, in my mind, the old cartoon Dungeons and Dragons was a Greyhawk based cartoon, though there's nothing really in it that identifies it as that. But it's such a the system itself is such a kind of a patchwork setting that you could imagine all those things in it. But I think eventually the D&D cartoon was declared to be part of Mystara, but I don't know. So, chess or checkers, chess or checkers. There were some good things added to AD&D Second Edition, but like the idea of kits, and I think that's where they first introduced weapon proficiencies and stuff. But there's still the whole system is a bit of a mix and match mess. Okay, you really have to spend a lot of time referring to books to understand how everything is run. Okay, no matter what the system was, and this is one of my. I think it's just an immutable truth of role playing. Role playing games are complicated. Period. Period. Okay, but you'll see one of the great, tenets of OSRs. OSR being old school Renaissance, old school revival, whatever you want to call it. Old school jerk offs is what I call it. Because believe me, if you encounter them and talk to them and get their input on what is and isn't OSR, you'll see a bunch of jerk offs. To them, everything should be simple. It should be simple. They want it to be like either old AD&D, or they want it to be like either basic Dungeons and Dragons, which, as I told you, even as a little tiny ass kid, was too basic. And they're like, it should be simple. It should be simple. All role playing games are complicated. If you want simple, stick with checkers, literal checkers. If you don't think they're complicated, take a person that's never played a role playing game in their life, has no experience with it, try to get them to play any edition of D&D. It's fucking complicated to them. So shut up about yours. This should be simple. This is too complicated. They're all complicated. Some other really cool systems. Gamma World. Here's the beloved Marvel superheroes. The best superhero system ever. Period. Right there. Has a brilliant chart system. So everything you could do was determined on this chart. Like if you had a fighting ability, it was the highest end was, the most powerful. The lowest end was the weakest. What you were trying to accomplish fell somewhere here on the chart, as either a red or yellow or red, yellow, or green feat. And you rolled and you looked to see where your result came in. It was brilliant. It was simple. But the way that you could build your character and then customize them by using resources such as the Ultimate Powers Handbook, it made the possibilities endless, and you could bring all these Marvel superheroes to life. And we had some really great adventures, and I still use ideas that we created back then for some of my stories. Okay, so second edition pissed me off. I didn't want to have much to do with third edition. I mean, I played a little bit, played some video games. So I've played every version of every edition, okay? Even played a little bit of 5e. But what got me back into role playing was the Pathfinder role playing game. Okay, Will and Tony were like, you should try Pathfinder. Pathfinder's great. So I get into Pathfinder with them and start playing that, and I fell in love with it. I thought, man, this is everything I wanted from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. The things that were bizarre, where there were too many tables, were streamlined. The THAC0 rule, which is to hit armor class 0, meaning 0 was like one of the hardest armor classes to hit, and numbers below that were even harder. So you would have -1, -3, -4, meaning they were harder to hit. and you had to roll higher to hit those numbers. To me, it made no sense. I kept for the longest time as a youngster, I would read it and I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. Shouldn't that number be higher? And that was the first thing they did was switch that around for third edition and then ultimately Pathfinder, meaning your armor classes were then better if the number was higher rather than lower. So if you can imagine to hit armor class 0 is to hit armor class 20 in modern gaming. Okay. That's kind of how it worked. Except you had to look at these bizarre charts, and everybody had their own bizarre saves. So third edition changed it around, and it gave a lot of agency to the players. But for some reason, this OSR, this old school revival, old school renaissance, this old school mentality of things should be simple, but what I say, they're not simple, they're complicated. So shut up about that shit. That mentality does not like the idea of player agency. I don't know why. No idea why. No idea why. So Pathfinder itself is essentially a retro clone because it's a version of the third edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, I absolutely love Pathfinder First Edition. It's pretty much what I think is the best version of the game. And it's complicated. Yeah, it is complicated. But all RPGs are complicated. If you don't think they are, just go play the Dungeon board game. That's nice and simple. Your character is on a card. It's easy to play. The great thing about Pathfinder is that it's modular. So you can run and play it with just this book, core rule book. Though there is a library, a galaxy of books, a multiplicity of sources for this system. Those can either be allowed by your dungeon master, your game master, or they can be disallowed. Things can be approved, things can be banned. Okay, I found over time that there are some games where I do like to limit the scope, and there are others where I open it wide open for advanced players that I know or players that I trust. Okay, the only system that I have real problems with is the Spheres of Power system, Spheres of Might, because it is so highly unbalanced that if you allow it into a campaign, the dungeon master, game master immediately has to redesign every encounter. And that's even if the players don't make it intrusive upon each other by using that system. So that's an entirely different discussion, though. So all of a sudden, Paizo says, to hell with Pathfinder First Edition. We're going to do Second Edition. They don't think they're selling enough. 5e is selling too much. People talk about 5e. Oh, it's popular because it blah, blah, blah. It's popular because of two things, okay? Let me break it down for you. Stranger Things, number one, and then Critical Role, number two. Stranger Things, I love. You see them playing old AD&D in it. That got a lot of people who were not into role-playing games interested in it. And then Critical Role appeals to the modern YouTube generation because it's on YouTube. They wound up playing 5e not because it's the better system, but because it's better to watch on TV. That's why. It's better to watch. Well, I don't like watching people play a role playing game. To me, that's just the height of inanity. My role playing game time is either spent designing a character, designing an adventure, or actually playing it, or actually running it. There is no time for me to watch you play it. Fuck you. I don't want to watch you play it. If anything, I might listen to a podcast if I'm just trying to occupy my mind at work or something. That I might do, okay? Some other retro clones worth mentioning. Mutant Crawl Classics, which is a spin-off of Dungeon Crawl Classics. And another attempt to kind of create an early retro clone of the early basic system. And then there are things like Savage Worlds that use an entirely different system. I do like the elegance of the advantage and disadvantage system for D&D 5e. I think that's a great system. That alone. But there's too much in it that's just so basic that doesn't make sense to me. And going back to the beginning, basic was not enough for me. I want more options. I want more crunch. I want more mechanics. Okay. And then Savage Worlds throws. There's kind of a brilliant design because they said, okay, well, let's make something that's not D20. So they outlaw the D20 and use dice for your stats to represent your character build. Okay, so it kind of simplifies it in that way, but then it overcomplicates the game in other ways. It introduces dumbass cards for initiative, and the terminology all of a sudden becomes about almost like playing a poker game. And to me, that breaks immersion. Like, I don't need to have a poker game in the middle of my role playing game because the terminology is about a poker game. The cards are about a poker game. It doesn't have a place in a stat array, in a fantasy game, in a science fiction game. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't have spades and aces as part of my makeup. It's fucking dumb. But for people that are like anti D20 or OSR or whatever, they might like this. They might see it as simpler, but it's not simple. I'll take a fucking Pepsi challenge against any of you motherfuckers. Run my game, Pathfinder, against your game. I guarantee you they'll both run just as smooth, if not mine being even smoother. Sip. Okay, so I'm setting up, giving you my backstories and stuff. So eventually, I had to quit Will's Pathfinder game. He wanted to switch to second edition. I was interested in playing with Mythic rules. He says we could play with Mythic rules, but then he never allowed it. So I played it for 4 fucking years. He never allowed Mythic rules. And there was an initial point of contention of the direction of the characters. Okay. Now, anytime you play in a group, you have to make concessions to be a part of the group. You got to go along with the group. Sometimes you might think absolutely we have to go left. We have to go left, and everybody else is like, let's go right. It looks better to the right, and sometimes you just have to, okay, we will go to the right no matter what you think. Okay, you just have to concede. But there was this initial confusion. Okay, these guys brought me in to play Pathfinder. They said, okay, we're playing Pathfinder. We're on this island. We get off this island. We're on a boat. Okay, Will, as a GM, would never commit to where the boat was. So we had to research, okay, and just assume, okay, we're coming out of the shackles. Now we're playing Pathfinder. I'm making a Pathfinder character. My character wants to be a Pathfinder. So I'm going along with this storyline of, we're on this boat for reasons, okay, that were never determined. We crash, which is okay. And then we're going somewhere for reasons. So no one had suggestions except for me. And I said, let's go to Absalom. My character wants to be a Pathfinder. This was his motivation that I gave him. The idea that he had grown up hearing stories of Pathfinders. Because one thing I did like from the Forgotten Realms was the Harpers. I like the idea of a group of kind of do-gooders, and they were called the Harpers in Forgotten Realms. Because I'm an old Star Wars fan. I love the Jedi. I love that kind of concept. So we're playing Pathfinder. My character wants to be a Pathfinder. We're on a boat where the DM doesn't know where it is. None of the players know where it's going. I'm suggesting let's go to Absalom so I can become a Pathfinder. Now, as a GM, there's a number of ways that this can be handled. You can handle it off screen. Okay, you guys went to Absalom. You were able to meet with Pathfinder Society. They've given you a first mission. All this can be handled off screen. You can also do it on screen. Make it in game. Okay. You guys make it to Absalom. What do you do now? Well, I want to go to the Pathfinder Lodge. Okay. That was never an option for me, okay? This is where I feel like OSR GMs do not like player agency. Okay, so I eventually quit after 4 years. My character was becoming ninth level and still could not go to Absalom. And I was at the point where I was like, well, if my character's trying to get there and he's constantly diverted, he wouldn't go along with this. I mean, I and this is the glory of it is let me make a character, let's tell the story, and we have to do it as a group. We have to do it all together. But then you become invested in it. You become invested in that story, and then when things are antithetical to your character, you have to start to make decisions like, am I going to go along with this? Would my character go along with it? And eventually I said, no, fuck this game. I don't want to play it anymore under these conditions. All you had to do was give me a wayfinder and let me play the game. That's it. My first Pathfinder build, I made some decisions in the build, not being familiar with the game, that I wanted to change, and he would not let me change it. He would not let me respect them. He had this old school sensibility that was what you chose, that's what you have, that's what you're going to play. When I felt like my character wouldn't go along with the storyline, I suggested, can I make another character that would be a part of this story so I can keep playing and feel like my character would be a part of this? His answer was no. That's not how my game works. It's literally what he said to me, was that's not how my game works. So my answer was, fuck you, fuck your game. I quit then. I fucking quit. And never played with him again. My original DM, my first Pathfinder DM, and I quit. Why? Because I love to build that story. And so it got to that point where I was trying to build a story, and I felt like my GM wasn't helping me in that way, that he had his own ideas for where this story was going to go, but he wasn't listening to my input. And I wasn't saying that we had to go to Absalom, that the whole adventure had to be in Absalom. Throw me a bone, make it off screen, make it a Raven. For sending scrolls back and forth by Raven, that's fine. Okay. All right, so there you go. I laid the groundwork, my backstories. So here's my problem with OSR DMs. Are they all egomaniacs? Number one, red flags. They refer to themselves as God. This is God talking. You can't say that to God. This is God, blah, 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 blah. There's some point in one of the old books, maybe it's in the Dungeon Master Guide, where Gary Gygax basically says the DM is God. And this is essentially true. It is. The DM is God. While your group is playing, you can just say, I'm tired of you guys complaining. Rock falls on you. You're all dead. Ban everybody in the group. You're done. You're God. You lightning bolted everything. But don't refer to yourself as that. It's asinine. It's annoying. OSR DMs will refer to themselves in third person. Well, what's the Mythic Game Master going to do now? Really? Really? We know you're the DM. We know who you are. We know the DM ultimately has control. Is that what you have to talk about? Another red flag, constantly joking about their own power, what they're going to do. You walk down the hall, everything opens up, and you die. I mean, you can say that over and over again. You open the door, it explodes, and you die. As a joke. You could say that about absolutely everything. But you undermine the story that you're creating, this story world. Okay? GM is not a storyteller in that they plot out a story with Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. They know exactly what's going to happen. Now, they might have those act connections built in. Like, I want them to be able to reach this low point at one point so they can go to here, or I want them to be able to reach that low point here and so they can go to there. And you try to help them reach it, but along the way, you let them make the decisions. How are they going to do that? How do their characters react to it? What are the creative solutions that they offer along the way? And you remain open to those suggestions. It's a story world. Okay, there's a part of the story being told by the GM, by the game master, and then there's a part being told by the characters, by the players. And when it comes together, that's when the beauty happens. And you wind up creating this really fun story that you enjoy continuing to create and that they enjoy being a part of. That kind of, it occupies their mind when you're at work and you can think about your fun character and where you're going to go with it next. So if we're creating this story world, it's important to remember what Shakespeare said: the play is the thing, the game is the thing, the story world is the thing. It's not the DM calling himself God, the DM reminding me of his name over and over again, the DM constantly joking that we're going to die. If I'm telling, actually literally telling the story, it doesn't need a riff track. Okay, that's another huge problem we'll get to a little bit later. If I riff track everything, you as a player don't know what to believe. If I say the door opens and explodes, you're all dead. No, I was just joking. Well, for that 2 seconds I said it explodes, you're thinking it explodes. Well, then I make you immediately retcon it. No, that's not what really happens. It's not trapped. Don't do that shit. The play is the thing. Build the story. Let them get into it. Let the tension build. In storytelling, you learn that tension is like a balloon. You can cause it to expand or you can let it contract. Or you can pop it. For whatever reason, OSR GMs want to limit player agency. They hate things like Pathfinder, where a player will be able to determine, something happens nearby, they can react to it. Okay, I don't know why they hate this. The DM is still God. You still have all ultimate power, but at some point, the DM, you take responsibility for what comes into the game. So if I say we're going to play Pathfinder, we're only using the core rule book, then anything that's in this book should be allowed. If I have a power that says at the start of initiative I can make everybody change their initiative and their position on the battlefield, then the DM should allow it, no matter what they want. Period. If I say I'm going to allow everything, then when a player presents their character sheet to me, it is the DM's, the game master's responsibility to sit down at some point and research everything. You just read up on that character. That's all you have to do. You don't have to read everything in the damn book. Just read what that character has. If it says they have a +5 Vorpal sword, then at some point you flip to the page with Vorpal swords and you read that paragraph on Vorpal swords. That's what happens. For whatever, OSR DMs won't allow respecs. Like I said with Will, he wouldn't let me do a respec. There's even retraining rules built into Pathfinder where you spend time and money to rechange and change things. Won't allow respec. Why? How does that help anything at all? It's not real life. It's not your story that I'm suddenly retconning midway through. I mean, yes, you want decisions to have weight, you want decisions to have consequences, but it is a game. Game is built on math. The math provides an architecture, a structure, a balance. Okay? If you feel like a character is just not quite playing the way you thought it was, sometimes you want to change things so you can continue to enjoy the game. Anytime a player has said to me, this build isn't working, can I change this or that? I just tell them, yeah. I say completely redesign it however you want to. But then I do encourage them. I say, make those changes, but let's try to keep it that way going forward so that They don't feel like they've completely screwed up and nerfed their character to where it can't do anything because they made poor choices in their build. But they do feel like they were given some kind of agency to correct those changes, correct those problems. And that can be in any edition of the game. How do I know that? Because I just explained it to you that I've played almost every edition of the game. How you like that, OSR GMs? You can run into me on the Paizo forums sometimes, though I hate it. It's a dreadful place. It's a hive of scum and villainy. You'll find me as the PFRPG Grognard, or the PFR Grognard. Because I'm Pathfinder Grognard. That's the way I look at it. It's the game I've wanted to play for a long time. I think it can do a lot of things, and I have a lot of fun playing it. And I have a lot of fun running it. The other thing OSR GMs don't like is knowledge checks. They don't like you to use lore for some reason. They want you to discover everything about the characters, about the creatures or the place or whatever, which is fine, I guess, to a certain extent. But at some point, players are going to have encountered every orc, every gnoll, every type of dragon. There are no new discoveries to be made. You're using your own intent to ignore meta knowledge. So I always look at knowledge checks as a way of allowing player agency, of a way to insert story information that I need, especially if it's about an area, whether it's a history or a certain religion or this or that. It's a great way to be able to drop more information about the region, but OSR DMs are just afraid of it for whatever reason. I don't understand it. It's fucking dumb to not allow your players to make knowledge checks. It's dumb. And then the other just idiotic notion that you hear from these OSR guys is, oh, everything should be simple. It's all in one book. It's one book. But this book, but it has this expansion which has been added to it. So it's all house rules, but it's one simple book, just like the old. But it's expanded. Oh, and oh, it's got another book, and now it's a glut. Now there's a glut. There's more than one book. It's a glut. I cannot read them. Shut the hell up with that. Shut up. Shut up. How many how many players are at your table? 4 players? 5 players? 6 players? You can't take one afternoon to research their character? Really? If you want it to be that simple, play the Dark Tower board game. Play the dungeon board game. Stick with cards. You can't research your characters that are in your game. Really? It's a glut. Glut my ass. You can easily say, we're only allowing this book. We're only allowing this book plus the Advanced Player's Guide. We're only allowing this book plus the Advanced Player's Guide and Ultimate Magic. You have complete and total control over it because the DMs are God. You don't have to say it over and over again. Well, God says. Well, God says. Well, God says. Shut up with that shit. They want to bitch about stuff being too complicated. It's not too complicated. You're just a dumbass. You want nostalgia for old system for whatever reason. Listen, it's 2021 as of this recording. There are modern RPG resources. You have Hero Lab if you want to put the money into it. Makes designing characters and NPCs easy. You can do it in a matter of minutes. There are SRD apps on your phone. You can look up any rule in a matter of seconds. In seconds! You don't even have to touch the books. There's the completely free system reference documents online. Like, you don't know how to Google? You can't hit what is damage from falling SRD Google. You can't do that? Really? Where are you playing? In fucking Timbuktu? You have no internet access? Asshole? Like, what the hell? All right, let me close out with some positives. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to the players. The positives of OSRGMs, they do allow game creativity. They allow player creativity as long as it doesn't involve mechanics. If you try to tell them, well, according to the rules, my character can do this or that, they'll just be like, oh, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. But if you can come up with something that has nothing to do with the rules whatsoever, it's just creative, a lot of times it will allow that kind of stuff. Another great quality is they have very strong role play. They love to role play. They'll give you great interaction with your NPCs. They'll give you silly voices or whatever. And that's what you want. And they're also open to exploring new systems. But for some reason, they'll read 5,000 new OSR books or simplified systems, but they can't be pissed to read one damn rule book and stick with it. But again, some people like checkers, some people like chess. I like checkers and chess. I prefer checkers because I like the complicated options. But it's okay to like what you want to like. It's okay. They're all complicated. Make it as simple or as complicated as you want it. It doesn't matter. It's all up to you. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, don't. I don't care.